Hi everybody, welcome to Leon's Chainsaw Parts and Repair. Let's get started on Hal's reassembly. So the first thing that we're going to do... Okay, thanks Katie.
I saw them. They were by your pants.
Okay, thank you. I don't know how my kids know I'm making a video every time I am, but that door opens. It's like clockwork. So, anyway, I've taken the time to clean a little bit up, just enough to get us through this part of the project. We're going to pull that crankshaft back into place.
Don't yet you'll sit in that chair.
I am sitting in that chair, Katie.
I told ya.
Yeah. So I'm putting a little oil on the crankshaft here, just to help protect the new seal that came in this crankcase. So that's one thing we don't have to do. So you want to get it started and sitting pretty straight. And then what we're going to do is set up a series of washers. In this case, I've got pipe here too, but I don't need that this time around. I'm going to set up a series of washers to pull this thing up into place. There we go. And this is slow, you can probably figure that out. You got to do it more than once, and the threads are only on the outside of that. Hey Katie, hey, shh. You can be out here, but... Okay, you get your chainsaw. Last year 2 years ago for Christmas, they both got the pink husk Varnas from Dowels. Okay, so I've got enough washers stacked that I'm going to crank this clutch plate down while I hold the crankshaft from turning, and that is going to start pulling this thing into place. Like I say, we'll have to do this a couple times, removing washers along the way, but that's okay. So anyway, the pink husk Varna, she will work on out here. It's kind of cute. You gotta grab the flywheel. Forgot that. One of the things I did get ready for this is pressure wash the hell out of all the old dirty junk, so it's drying. Okay, that'll give me something to hold on to. And just crank this down until that, except we got to go backwards, dummy. There we go. Until it quits moving, I'll know it's bottomed out on that clutch plate, and we need to put another washer in.
Wait. You're always done with the yellow one? Yes, I was done with the yellow one.
I had to order parts for the yellow one, honey.
Oh.
So I can't finish it tonight.
That's why you worked it on the
Yep.
this one?
That's right. That's why I'm working on this one.
You could try to finish it.
So you can see the groove in the bearing right there, and that's what I'm watching. And after I see that disappear, I'm going to know that I've gotten close, and then it's time to start thinking about putting the screws back in. Okay, come on. There we go. Probably take one more set of washers after this.
Got my earmuffs.
Okay, Katie. Alright, you'll feel it pull into place and stop. So we're there. On the video, I'm going to condense this down quite a bit. The reality is this was about probably 10 minutes worth of goofing around. You've got to be careful as you go and make sure that all your washers clear that step on the crankshaft. If they're big enough, they will without any hassle at all. If they aren't, you might do some damage. So, you want to be careful. Alright, we'll get the flywheel out of the way for a moment. And wipe my hands and we'll go on to the next difficult.
Are you okay, Daddy?
Yep. There might be too much stuff in this shop that I'm trying to walk around. Just mine. Okay. So I've already got the piston installed on the connecting rod. I went ahead and put a new bearing in the connecting rod because the old one came apart. Had a needle actually drop when I was taking the old piston off, which is abnormal. I don't normally see that, but there you are. So the trick to this is to A, get your clock figured out. By that I mean which direction your piston's going to go. This aftermarket piston, the pin is open on both sides, so we're gonna install it. It doesn't just, when it's open on both sides, you don't have to worry about it. But there's an arrow on the top that tells you want to go to the exhaust side. That puts the ring opening on the inside where there's no port for it to catch on. The cap is fractured from the main rods. You want to get this lined up and figured out.
I get my chainsaw.
And then you want to not mix this order up as you lay it down. Otherwise, when you go to put everything together, it's kind of a pain in the neck. So what we're going to do is just take some regular wheel bearing grease, clean wheel bearing grease of course, and smear some in the cap, keeping it off the end, and then we'll smear some on the rod side as well. And this is going to serve to hold those little needles in place. Now this works well, but it's not a fail-safe for being bumble-fingered. You do need steady hands for this.
Got my chainsaw and ready.
Okay, Katie. So I cleaned these off with brake clean. Got all the garbage out before firing the video camera up again. That's the kind of stuff that it's easy enough to talk about. You don't need an on-air demonstration here, so to speak. So I'm going to line this up to where it looks like this is full, and we'll come through and press them down. Really get them into that grease, because this is the piece that's got to be turned upside down as you're going to bolt it into the engine.
Yes, set my chainsaw right here.
Okay. Use a clean little screwdriver here just to make sure that's all flat. And as I suspected, there is room for one more. You don't want to overload this, but at the same time you want it to be full. Okay, line them all up as best you can. Set her down. Now I knocked that over, but we should still be clocked. Yeah. And you get the rest of your needles into this side.
I'm getting these things off. This thing should be off.
This is probably One of the most troublesome parts of doing a Homelite chainsaw, or quite a few other saws. I mean, almost all saws have this style set up. At least the older ones. And I don't know about the new ones. But it's hard to imagine a different system. Okay. That all lines up. Last check. So now, you want to roll your crankshaft up so that it's at the bottom of the stroke, which means that journal is right up at the top there. I've got my 2 screws set aside. Take a pair of needle nose pliers, gently, so you don't foul up those threads. And I already see this one moving around.
Please just.
And you pull. You don't do that. That's what you don't want to do. And I did it. Now thankfully only one needle came loose. But because it's already come loose from the grease, I'm going to push it down to the bottom here.
I got that too.
And we'll try this again.
Wait.
And remember that part I said about needing steady hands and not being a bumble finger. I don't think I got this mixed up, but we're going to check. Shoot. Now that is the ultimate bad case scenario right there. Okay. Take 2. Okay. That time it stayed. So now you got to hold that thing in place without rotating it too much. You got to have your screwdriver handy. It does rotate just a smidge to push those back down into place. Alright, I am happy with that. So here's the part where you need 3 hands and you only got 2. Okay, that's set in place pretty nicely. So now the question is, can we get that screw started enough to hold the cap in place? And so far the answer to that is, of course not. Damn Loctite left behind so much residue. See, this is why probably a lot of guys go ahead and leave the piston off. You can definitely get to these screws a lot easier with it off right now. I like to put it on now because it's so much easier to get to when you've just got the rod on the bench. It's a lot easier to press the pin into place and not have a bunch of sideways pressure on it, whatever you're doing. Okay, now I see my cap has moved, and that's not a good sign. Let's see if I get lucky here. In reality, I should have taken the time, I guess, to wire wheel these bolts and get all that freaking Loctite out of there. It's spinning this down so damn much easier. Come on. But if I see the end close up and it doesn't bind, I'll know that all the needles have stayed in place. That's why I do one for lots of reasons, but you do one of these at a time. So right now, if we're still free flowing, and we are, and this side is pulled up tight. So let's get the other screw in. Maybe it'll be easier on this side. A little bit further. One thing you do have to do when you do it this method is watch that you don't scratch the piston skirt on the cylinder studs here. That's another way you can ruin your day. Jack up a piston. Again, not my idea of fun. Using this method with a little 1/4-inch wrench and this fitting, or not fitting, but this socket with the hex head, you can't really over tighten these. I'm not going to get enough leverage on a little piece of 4-inch metal to snap that screw. So, good, we're set. Crank seal looks good around that shaft. I want to get the cylinder in place, I think, and then I think I will stop for the night. It's Monday night of Memorial Day, which means I've got 3 days worth of shipping that I need to do, so I'm sure it's building up. Let me grab a ring compressor here, which one I need. So, yeah, that one will work. Alright, so again, when you're sure your hands are clean, take your cylinder and get some clean oil into it for this install. This isn't technical, but just smear it all over. That way the fresh rings don't gall as you're trying to seat the thing. Actually, I'm going to do that twice because there is, interesting, there's a little bit of metal deposit in there. Rub oil around in one of these things and your hand comes away gray, stop and do another clean out. Thought it was cleaned out. It would appear I was wrong. So we'll do this again. Ah, much better. Much better. Okay. Alright. So for this part, get this down where you guys can see it a little bit better.
Oh, I got that too. See, I got it.
Yep, you've got an adjustable wrench too. Good job, Katie. Okay. So you want to make sure your piston rings are at their pins, kind of centered when you put one of these little guys over there. This is nothing technical. This is part of a kit that I got on eBay years ago. And all you do is center them and squeeze. Now these do have some pretty good tension to them, so I think the ring seal will be pretty good when it breaks in. So from here, you just line your piston up into your cylinder while keeping your rings compressed. And I slipped off there. Let's see if I can get it back. Damn it. This actually is easier to do when I don't have the saw in the vise, because it tends to, the swing arm tends to move around a little too much. Well, we'll try. I'm going to put my fingers back behind here to keep the crank from moving. There we go. Okay, once you've cleared your last ring, you just rotate this thing down and out while not losing what you gained, and then slowly work it into place. Cylinder gasket's already on there, so line up your studs.
I got a hat on my kid, and I got earrings on.
Okay. Yeah, okay, we're back at it here on House 925. We had just finished getting the cylinder installed last night. I did a few cleanup things since then, and realized I'm out of crankshaft seals, so we're going to only be able to go so far. I don't have a replacement one for the ignition side right here, but that's okay. We can get some work done. Quite a bit, actually. So the crankcase came with a new restrictor plate here, and what this prevents a bunch of garbage from gumming up to the back of the clutch and the oil pump. The first saws didn't have these, like the 700 and the 800, and what ended up happening was that the airflow was actually worse by the time sawdust built up than if they just put this big thing in here to begin with. So we'll use it. Get the oil pump on and the worm gear. And this time around we shouldn't have to worry about the worm gear being seized to the crankshaft. As I mentioned before, we will get a proper thrust washer here to drive the worm gear, as opposed to letting the bearing race just dig into this poor thing. Let me make sure. Yep, that's free. That's good. So putting these on, you want to slip the worm gear in there. First thing, make sure your pump turns. It ought to be able to move by hand. If it won't, figure out why. You can take the bearing, this bronze bushing bearing, whatever you want to call it, take those screws out, pull this off. I've had brand new pumps, many of them actually, the new old stock pumps, where this is seized up from the Cosmoline that they put on here for preservative. So my standard procedure, even on a new pump, is to pull it apart, clean it with brake clean, and then reassemble it with some lube in there. So that just slips into place. And get these oil passages right. Probably only one way it's going to line up. Yeah, just like that. Nothing else makes any sense there. Now once you get one screw started, they all ought to go. These do not have to be reefed down like your He-Man either. You want them tight, but you sure don't want to break one of these off. I don't think I've ever seen oil pump screws back off, so like I said, I'm going to get crazy with them. There we go. Alright. There's so many places we could go from here. First thing I'm going to do, get a new sprocket on here. I know Hal is very fond of the 404, or excuse me, the 3/8 sprockets. So we're going to throw one of those on there, get rid of this old worn out 404. One thing you do have to be careful on with shorter guide bars, and by shorter I mean under probably 24 inches. Odds are pretty good you're gonna have to add a link to your chain for the if you're trying to use a factory chain. 20-inch bar uses a 70 link chain. With one of these, you can't quite get it on. You got to upsize to a 71 link, so just be aware of that. I by mistake put one of these on the customer's saw this past winter, and when I mailed it back to him, he didn't have a reason to use it for a little while, and when he pulled it out, he's like, got a new bar and I can't get this chain on. And that's when I realized what I had done. So didn't help him out one little bit, but again, I know how, and I know that he wants chain speed, and these are capable of doing it, so no reason not to. Alright, this clutch is in pretty good shape. Get some brake clean real quick. I like to clean these clutches up. Just a quick rub down, get any oil, grease, crap off of them. Because this is just like the brakes in your car. They don't need to be lubricated. Okay, see, that's what came off of there. So none of that helps. I mean, what I'm doing right now, just handling it, that's going to contribute to buildup. There we go. That looks much better. Okay. I don't know if I can find. There we go. Put a piston stop in here. Tighten that down. You can also use, again, a chunk of rope. But because I have that nice and handy, I'm going to utilize it. Again, on these clutch cover screws, I made sure the washers went back on in the right direction. They're a concave, and you want to compress them against the clutch, but we're also going to give them just a little dab of the old Loctite here. Because again, we've all seen the drive case covers that have a big hole worn in them, and it's no coincidence that they're right in line with the heads of these screws. Again, you don't have to go crazy with Loctite, just get a little bit on the threads, down by the tip, and it should spit in. Oh boy. It's amazing how one project can get your workbench back to a disaster zone. Go. Oh, where do we want to go next? Even though I don't have the crank seal, I can install this and leave the flywheel off, and I'll leave the module loose. So I can install that seal after the fact. So this has an O-ring on the back that seals it to the crankcase. You want to make sure that that's seated before you start pushing this in, just to minimize the chance of being pinched. There's two alignment dowels right here. And I'm noticing that I had to install this one off the old crankcase. It wasn't, didn't come in the new one, but I don't have it seated. Maybe. There we go. Good enough. Not critical there, but might as well do it the right way. O-rings in place. Just align this with those pins, and it'll start to drop down. Keep that out of the way. And I've used multiple techniques with this, but what I like to do to get it in place is get a small socket. Just kind of go around the outer perimeter here and kind of tap it down. But this is cast, so you don't want to get crazy with it. And maybe this is why. It's interesting. Not sure that pin is lining up as well. There it goes, I think. It's interesting. Go. Perfect. If that ever has to come off again, that's a tight fit. That will not be any fun. So I'm hoping it's not me that has to take it off, if it ever does. But it shouldn't. There's no reason for it to. Now we'll put back our screws. I'm going to run these over a wire wheel real quick. Clean all the gunk off. Those are going to get the Loctite as well. That's a fairly high vibration area, all things considered. The Super XL automatics, there was a batch of those in the mid to late 80s that were assembled with where the Loctite did not get applied to the fuel tank screws, and oh boy, an awful lot of saws were thrown away because people thought they were seized. And in reality, it was one of those tank screws that had backed out into the back of the flywheel. I hate to think of how many saws were pitched that weren't really bad. Okay, everything's nice and seated. Get this last screw way back here. Cylinder head. Okay, so that'll allow us to put our throttle handle back on, which will make this look a little more like a saw again. I don't like having to mess with unscrewing the spark plug lead and fishing it behind the throttle handle. It's so much easier to have it in place first. If you can avoid trying the mess of pulling the boot off and fishing it, you should avoid. Okay, now this is where my prep work had ended. So I have to take some time and clean up the old gasket material off of here and go get a new gasket out. Thankfully this is a brand new case, so not going to be a problem there. So I'll get some a new gasket and get that cleaned up, and we'll come back. Okay, old gasket cleaned up, new gasket in hand. So let's see if we can fish this thing back into place. Ah, I hosed myself. I shouldn't have put that clutch on yet, because I left this oil line on. We'll see if that's a deal breaker. Oh, I think I can get to it. I think I can. So there's a nice little spark plug groove. This plate that's riveted here holds that in place. Get our gasket up in here and get some screws started. Again, this gasket's not, it's there for a reason. It seals the air box up and prevents you from getting sawdust and trash down into your engine, but it's not one that's holding compression or anything, so you don't have to be quite as anal retentive about getting everything just absolutely perfect. The paint on the back tends to chip as you're taking the old gasket off. That's not going to hurt anything. You don't have to take the time to sand all of the paint off. Okay. So let's see anything hitting the cylinder. Let's see. There it goes, starting to pull into place. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and start this lower screw. Again, something's fighting me here, and I don't know what. Dang it. Shouldn't be anything. See anything jamming. Ow. Okay. One little hang up. There we go. That'll catch those. Okay. The one thing I didn't do that I could have first is put the reed block in before putting this on. A lot of guys, because it's so tight, will take this whole handle off to get to the reed block. You don't have to do that. I mean, it is easier to get to those screws, but if you use just a little bit of finesse, you can get a reed block in or out without doing that. And the bonus to not having it in there is you have way more access to these lower screws to actually torque them properly. And to me, that's more important, because these screws and that one down below, they basically form the connecting point for the entire back half of the saw. I mean, all of it is those screws. So I want them to be snug and torqued the way they should be. And again, no, I'm not putting a torque wrench on them, but you can use some common sense for a 12-24 screw and know about when the heck you need to stop. You've got to really be reefing on one of these in a way that is not smart to break one, unless they've crystallized. I have seen those before. In fact, we've drilled them out of 925s on video together before. So, okay, and it's normal to see this gasket stick up a little bit here. And also acts as a dam. If you overflow any of your fluids, they won't run back and soak your air filter unless you've really overflowed them. I don't know if that was Homelite's plan, but I'll tell you what, that's how it works. So, alright, so here's our reed block. And I'm not going to do anything with this other than just wipe a little bit of sawdust off, because there's nothing wrong with it. The seal is still pliable. You guys can see that. The reeds are all sitting flat against the block. And it's okay if you've got one that has just, you know, about a reed. Those are thin, but one reed's width, if it's sticking up a little bit, it's not too bad. Okay, got some more parts and everything together. We'll get the fuel hose, carburetor, and all that stuff on this. And maybe the muffler. That'll be about as far as we can go until that crank seal comes in. So this is a good time for me to showcase my kit that I sell. I've got a lot of kits for hoses for these Homelite saws. This is what you're going to get with the 925 kit. I actually think I advertise, excuse me, 2 grommets. I don't have it out here, but some of these air boxes, it's just way too small to put a second grommet in there. Especially where they used this size hose initially, or close to that. So about all we can do is put a little dab of silicone around there at the end and seal it up. So first thing you want to do is get your grommet in the tank. Now these things originally had, I'll make this easier on myself, originally had a molded hose. The grommet, so to speak, was built into it. And then the hose went into the tank. You connected your filter to that, and then your steel pipe just pushed in from the outside. We're going to use that same basic technique with this kit, only without the molded grommet. Those hoses have gotten somewhat hard to find, and the reproduction ones that I have seen and personally used, I have been extremely unimpressed with. So I'd much rather use some Tygon that I know is good. So you just need to work this into place. It fits that opening easily. You just want to slowly get it in there. Don't go crazy with whatever screwdriver you're using and tear it. There you go. Good enough. Alright, so there's a couple tricks here. I've had a few people contact me, especially through the House of Homelite forum, saying that the kit was hard to install. And it's not, if you follow a couple real basic guidelines. Almost every hose I send out has an angle cut like that. I add a ½ an inch to the length that the factory calls for to account for the angle cut. That makes it easy to get it through a hole, a grommet, whatever. Get yourself some stiff wire. Bend yourself a hook on the end. Take your hose, and right where it's pointy, go in 1/8 to 3/16 from the tip, and punch a hole. Then hook it on your tip, or hook the tip of it through onto this wire. Just pinch it shut. Pretty good. You can pull pretty hard on that. Take your oil. Just put a little bit on there. Don't have to go crazy. It doesn't take a huge amount. I've got the equivalent of about 2 drops on there, which is probably 1 too many, but that's alright. Then, whatever direction you want to pull your hose, feed it in. Feed the wire in. And as the hose, I'll tilt this back so that you guys can see this a little better. There we go. See if I can zoom this in and have it still That looks like a whoop. About it. Okay. So then as your hose meets your grommet, just watch it. And make sure that it's pulling in. You'll see the grommet pucker a little bit. This is tight. I like to push a little bit with this hand as I'm pulling on the wire so that I don't tear that out. But voila. All of a sudden, there we are. Nothing to it. So at this point, you don't need your wire anymore. You can clip the angle cut off. I'm not going to put the fuel filter on just yet. If I was using a brand new white one, I wouldn't want to get greasy fingers all over it. Alright, so this pipe has a little bit of a wowza to it. Zoom back out here. You can see that. That was probably somebody trying to replace it when it was still in place here. It's not kinked. I straightened it up a little bit there. It's not going to hurt a thing. It's very common to see that. So, get your oil can back out. Another grip lid over the end of this. Now this is a little more difficult at this point. You need to grip your hose with your pliers and kind of rock this into place, and you got to mess with it. Make sure you get your pliers in the right spot so that you can hold the hose far enough back that you've got room to get it at least started over that barb, but not so far back that it's super limber and you get nowhere with it. Once you get started, it shouldn't be too difficult. So we're going to go right to the bend, or just below the bend. That's in roughly 5/16 of an inch. That's enough. Back to your oil can. Lube this up again on this end, because what we're going to do, we're going to mimic the way the factory had that set up. I'm going to pull this into place and pull this barb all the way through the grommet, and then the grommet will be resting on the edge of the hose here, just past that. Now this is where you got to go slow, and I like to angle it as I start to pull and push it through, kind of move it around, because if you go too fast here, you're going to pull that grommet into the tank, and then you get to start this process over again. So I suppose if I was being real technical, it'd be best not to cut your angle tip off of this hose until you've got this thing seated. Alright, that just went in. Now I'm going to leave it cocked up like that a little bit because it'll make it easier. Well, let's see, how do I want to do this? No, there's a better way. Keep forgetting about this. So when you bolt your carburetor in place, you've only got a smidge of room to work with getting this hose onto the carburetor bar. So it's actually easier to put it on first and then make your connection out here last. So with that in mind, we'll push the angle cut through and just pull it off to the side here. And our carburetor, since Hal had it running, I am going to assume that it is fine for now until I know differently. It'll at least be good to do a test run and break this piston and new piston into the cylinder and get those rings seated. So one more dab of oil just for good measure on the carburetor barb. Make sure it goes all the way around. But you're trying not to press it up into the barb. You don't need that extra oil getting into your fuel system. Okay, on a warm day you can do this by hand and just work that barb, or that hose up over the barb. If it's a cool day, and the hose is a little bit stiffer, you're going to be using pliers on that. Alright. Seeing that the high-low grommet here on the side pushed out a little bit. Probably somebody tried to install that with the carburetor bolted to the engine. In fact, I can tell by the way it's torn up on the back here that that's exactly what happened. That doesn't work. You gotta have your carburetor loose. Otherwise these grommets get torn to beat hell. But it's still got enough left back here that it'll seal that air box up, and that's what you're looking for. So speaking of sealing that air box up, we want to be sure to get our little dab of silicone on there. So, what do I want? What hasn't dried? This is some real nice RTV. I know it's not bad yet because I just used it on the transfer case on my pickup. So I'm going to come back here about 1.5 inches. Just a nice little coat. Try and spread it evenly. There we go. And the theory is that's going to pull into place and form a nice seal as we put the carburetor in. So remember, we've got to hook up the throttle linkage and feed these screws into that grommet and pull that into place all at about the same time. And there we are. Wow. I'm happy with that. You can't even see the silicone back there. Oh, we'll get this started. 90% of the time you ought to be able to start these by finger so that you can be certain that you... There we go. You don't have anything cross-threaded. That's a quick way to mess up that intake manifold with those inserts into the Bakelite or plastic or whatever it is. Okay. We will go ahead and finish tightening on those. And these do not have to be reefed on. They need to be tight, but they don't need to be Superman tight. All you're looking to do is compress that gasket against the intake, and if there's any little imperfections, the gasket will fill them in. Done. Okay. You can see I've got a little extra fuel hose here, and that's because I know how much of a pain this can be. So I cut them plenty long for folks. But in reality, I can lose a good inch off of that. And I'll go back a little further than the factory did, just because I can. Once again, we'll get out our oil. That's why I didn't totally bend that down. Well, not bend, but seat everything all the way. I wanted to have access to this. Come on, baby. There we go. Some of these jobs are actually easier with 2 sets of pliers. Let's see if I can manhandle this. Hopefully that's, yeah, we're sort of still in frame. I know my arm's in the way here, but I'm just trying to work the hose back on this pipe. And you want to be careful. You can squeeze this flat, and that's not going to hurt it. What will hurt it is if you tweak it too far side to side, and then the edge of your pliers start cutting on it. almost to where I want to be. I'm going to call that good. So you'll notice that there's a little bit of bubbles, not the right word, but just a slight protrusion there. If you ever have to take the carb off again, that's that little bit of extra that you want, so that you have a little slack there to get your pliers in and pull that off. So we can reuse the factory clamp for the pipe. I have it partially screwed into place here, and that might be a mistake, because I may not be able to get it to come out. Come on. I could do 100 of these off video and they wouldn't give me an ounce of trouble, but because the camera's rolling. There, come on, you. So just hold that in place. And screw it down. Again, this is a small screw, so don't get carried away. There we go. Hidden away, just like the factory would have wanted. And this is better. Again, it will last. So now we'll drop a fuel filter on this bad boy. If you had trouble with this, you could put a little oil on the barb as well. Here. There we go. Drop her in. And you want to hear that drop to the bottom. I'm not sure that it did yet. Oh yeah, there we go. And again, even on this one, there's just about a half an inch of extra hose. If you've ever got to mess with anything, you replace a fuel filter, the end of that hose tears, you've got a little extra so that you don't have to replace the whole mess again. And this Tygon line ought to be good for you at a long damn time, especially if you can stay away from the ethanol fuel. Okay. This is really starting to look like a saw. Alright, so I have packaged away, I forgot, a new air filter cover that will replace this damaged one, this landing. I've gone through that on a previous video, especially on these saws that had this from the factory. That little ring of metal is essential. Without it, it won't clamp the air filter down tight. And I've seen all kinds of weird gizmo mechanisms of wire wrapped around the nut to try and make it tight, but it's still not sealing that air filter properly. If this is damaged for some reason, replace it. Even if you've got to make your own little ring that sits loosely on top, and then this clamps to that, do something, because just those, there's a reason Homelite quit relying on just these pressure points out here. It causes a little push up in the middle. You get sawdust leaking by there, and then you have problems. So I'm going to clean up that muffler flange, find a gasket, go get the other air filter cover, do a little cleanup on the handlebar. We'll come back and install that stuff, and then yeah, we'll have a little downtime for a few days until that crankshaft seal comes in. Okay. So this muffler was missing its stiffener plate. This goes up inside of the muffler, so that's probably why it's missing. Somebody decided that was too much of a pain in the butt. It's not a huge amount of fun to get it to slip into place. That's what I thought. So you want the raised edge kind of to the back of the muffler here. And this muffler has definitely taken a beating. I don't know what what was done to it all, but being distorted out of there. We go. Alright, so that'll just naturally drop right into place, and you'll see that the screw holes line up. So from there, if you've got those screw holes roughly lined up, if there's any way that you can get your bolts to stay in the muffler cap with the proper spacers and start feeding them down through there, that is the least likelihood of irritation. So then you can just pop them through and you're good to go. Remember, this had the chain rash on it, so I mixed up a little JB weld and patched that up. If Hal wants to replace the muffler down the road, we can certainly do that, or at least this muffler body, but for now we want to get her running before we're putting too much more into it. God, this muffler is smashed so badly, it's not going to seal all that terribly well right there. Now, I'll install it and see how it looks, but I actually think this muffler body is going to be somewhat of a necessity. And then here is the gasket that they started adding late in the model run. We are going to use it. And again, these you want to start by hand. And if it doesn't go easy at first, find out why. Don't just keep reefing on it. Alright. Disappearing socket syndrome here again. There we go. There it goes. Okay. That's starting to pull itself down where it belongs. The only place it hasn't is back here. I know you guys won't be able to see that, but I can see the corner catching. So, try and reshape this muffler just a smidge. Without stabbing myself, because that's the part I don't like. Almost there. Once these mufflers are torqued out of shape, they don't like to come back. Come on. Goodness. Just this corner right here now. So close. There it goes. Now it's going to get a love tap. Okay. And I'm not going to say that's going to be 100% blow and exhaust where it should, but 85 to 90. We'll take it. About all we can hope for at this point. Okay. What should we tackle next? What do we do? We'll get our handle in place. I'm going to pull the bracket off of this old one. and we won't be reusing that. But we want some of the hardware. So there is a little steel spacer that's got angle cuts on it. It slips right in there. And of course I want the old hardware. This is the handle that's been welded, and again, you know, it's not bad. It's holding. But with all this other pretty metal on there, it's kind of goofy to put that back. Alright. Come on, you. Not gonna cooperate. Whatever. So I have somewhere, just brought it out, new handle bracket. This is drilled, as is correct for this vintage saw. They could accept the factory handguard if we'd like. These are going to want just a smidge of Loctite. Being part of the handle system, they are subject to plenty of vibration. And don't go crazy, just get a little on the tip. Smeared down into the threads, not just on the surface. We'll see if this little plate can behave for just 5 seconds. One thing Homelite produced an abundance of is handle brackets. There's very few that aren't very readily available. Good enough. Okay. So, if you watched the disassembly video, you'll know that on these 925s, this has a quasi-isolation system on it. The bottom handle mounting points have got rubber inserts in these holes that go all the way up through. You've got this rubber that we're going to have to feed in there, and then it's got the steel spacer plate. And what makes all that work are these special shoulder screws right here. Without these screws, that's not going to cut it. It won't do what it's supposed to do. You'll either have a really floppy handle or one that's just dead tight. Clean the threads up. Those are going to get a little Loctite too. Now this handle was under a little bit of pressure when I spun these screws out to take it apart, so it may fight us just a bit going back in. Hopefully not. Okay. You guys will have about as good of sight as I do. So, do a quick test fit. Oh yeah. Yep, there's a good half-inch gap there, so we'll use that to our advantage. And we'll feed these screws in first. And get all of our stuff in place. For a handle that hasn't been spread like this, you can't get away with this as much. You gotta feed these in one at a time and try not to drop them. Alright, I need to get the Loctite on there, but yeah, like that. Screw it. If it's going to be difficult, we'll just do it the other way. Get some Loctite on these now. Alright. So, you hold hold that in place. And I usually start with the bottom screw. That's going to be the easiest one to, damn it, align that to. Oh, you suck. One trick you can use if they get too irritating, like this one is rapidly becoming, is to start your upper handle screw just 2 or 3 turns. Of course, that's a new bracket, so there's paint in the threads. That'll keep that from flopping around quite so much. You just got to fish this up until you feel it catch. And then when you do, try not to lose it. And you should feel your screw just bump the thread recess. When you get there, get it started. And then I've got this at a bit of an angle. That's going to be a detriment. But you kind of got to fish everything into place. And you can see it through this other mounting hole. That's close. I know my back plate. There, that might have just dropped into place. There we go. Alright, so at this point, that's good to go. I want to spend just a second and pay attention to this side and make sure that it is just paint that I'm feeling and we're not having a thread. Yeah, okay. But I'm going to thread this through quite a ways. Okay, it's not totally tight yet, but since this handle is bent a little bit, I want to make sure that we're using enough threads on all the screws to kind of pull it back into shape so we don't break anything. Okay, snug and snug. So now I'm going to go for a torque. These are 1/4 inch thread, so I don't think you can get them too tight with a hand screwdriver. I don't think it's physically possible unless you're just a Mongo or something. Alright, finish with the right size. We'll finish this off. Okay, do the final torque, fully squared and done. Really? I don't need that thing groaning at me all the time. Much better. Okay, our handlebars in place. So let's button up the top here, and that will be it for a while. So I've got the new air filter cover. I forgot that I ordered that, and that is black. That is appropriate for this year of SAW. The starter cover had the black accents down here, so that matches that cover. This one was packaged in 1997. They went to kind of this crinkle paint finish. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but that's what they did. So if you get one that looks like that, that is factory. I've seen plenty of them like that. Now, when we were taking it apart, you guys remember I said that it was not installed quite properly because the ring is way up there. So we got to get that thing off. Now these little snap rings are one of the biggest annoyances known to man, because they are just a pain to work with. And if you get too medieval on these these ridges on the nut itself, the ring's not going to ever hold again. So you've got to get it up and over. See, I'm trying to get, ouch, without stabbing yourself in the finger like I just did. I mean, as much fun as that is. You know, hold what you got and try and achieve a little bit more. There. Okay. I've yet to find a pair of snap ring pliers that's small enough to deal with that. So we do it that old-fashioned way. So we'll slip the nut in, and that's actually really tight because of that paint. And then with this part, you just get, I like to get one side of the opened end down below the top, and then just attempt to work the other side over with your smallest flat blade screwdriver you can find. And then when you've got, so close, come on baby, don't do it, there, okay, once you get that, where it's wrapped all the way around the edge, just push it down. And now it's locked into place. That will actually seal an air filter. So let's put our choke rod on. Get that little bit of the gook cleaned up there. There's so much crap on these old saws. After 30, 40, 50 years, you can spend hours detailing all this out. Okay, our little copper, at least I think it's copper, it might be brass, soft cotter pin. The idea with that material is if it ever breaks and somehow gets down in the edge, it's not going to do as much damage as steel would. So feed that through carefully. You don't need to go crazy bending your ends open, just enough that it's not going to fall out. That way the next time you need to take it loose, it can be reused yet again. Okay. Here's our air filter bracket with the deflector installed upside down. That's cute. Should be sitting straight. There we go. Sorta. Maybe this one's cut crooked. Nah, that's better. Not perfect, but better. So there's the remnants. See that black right here? That's the remnants of an old air filter grommet. You want to clean that up. Get that off of there. If for no other reason you don't want that contamination on a good air filter to start deteriorating the grommet. Okay, give me that back. So this air filter's actually in reasonable shape. It needs blown off. We can at least test fit. Yeah, there we go. Oh yeah, nice. Not bad. Not bad at all. Okay, so in summary, that's how to assemble a 925 from scratch, basically. That's going to be a long video. I have no idea when I start to merge it, but I have to assume there's a better part of it. That's got to be north of an hour. I'll cut what I can when it's just me babbling. So, what we have left, I'll get that crank seal and I'll drive it into place. We'll bolt our module back down. Flywheel. I need to hook up the kill switch wire. That's an important one. Starter cover. I think I'll do all that stuff off camera when that seal comes in. And then the next time we see this saw, we're going to hope for a nice clean test run right here on the bench.